This conference
Right,
will
let's do
now
that.
be recorded.
Call the meeting to order. First item on the agenda is review and approve the minutes of January 28th. I have a motion on that.
I make a motion to approve.
Yep.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Minutes approved. Let's go down to Sharon Springs Inc. Ron, can you discuss that?
Sure. It's more or less a status report on Sharon Springs Inc. They are, as they and the developer, per Sandy Mackay as a representative, discussing the pilot changes or request with the municipalities, which appears at this point in time to be coming along and to a conclusion. There were some issues. The village attached some conditions, the town attached some conditions, including the securement of their other properties, the timing of their activities, and basically updating their project description for the bathhouses. This has all been accomplished, apparently, at least for Sandy Manco the other day. But what is still required, of course, is to go to their respective board meetings and present it to their boards for a vote. The village has passed it at this point, but it leaves, and I don't know what happened today at the county. I don't know if Sandy is waiting for her town first and then the county or vice versa. But I know the town meets the first week in the month, which is, I guess, a Wednesday of March. So they haven't formally passed it yet, but it seems to have moved along to that point. Financing wise, they're working with the Pursuit organization, and they have a list of to-dos and a list of items to get to the company, and that's what they're working on. So that's essentially where they stand at this point. If the village and town and county and school all pass the resolution, it will come to our board, and before our next board meeting, it'll come back to us for a vote at that point in time. I would presume at the end of March it would be able to come to us, but we'll see. That's where they stand. I don't know if there's any questions or.
In the meantime, Ron, the pilot is what right now, as of now? It's in effect, isn't it? So
Yes,
in other words.
Well, yes, it is, Joe, but it's in effect, but they're in default. So it's sort of, yes, it is in effect, but they're treading water, so to speak.
Right. So as of now, they're really in default, right?
Correct. Yes, it would be.
So anything that we do to, let's say, to extend the pilot would have to include a forgiveness of this default, right? As of this year, right?
We would have to review their reasons and basically accept them. In other words, yes, forgive them at this point for being late. I mean, obviously the reason they're defaulted is that A, it's not done, and B, the jobs didn't come with it, for not being done. So two big reasons for the default. Chet, you're back on mute, Chet, somehow.
I put it on mute so I wouldn't interrupt discussion with my pencil. There was supposed to be some work done on other properties. What did that include?
Well, right now it included, if you hang on, I'll get some of the writing, but most of it was due to security. It's not, I mean, there was some roof repair, which apparently was done on the Adler, just so it didn't get worse as weather, conditions. But the village and town were concerned about vandalism or just kids playing in it or both. And so that was one of the major issues. I will say, for instance, their schedule, and this is important because it boils also down to us, if this becomes a default mechanism, we have to put it in the pilot, and then we'd be following through on these demands. But for instance, the roof will be reassessed for potential leaks by May 15th. and the inspections will be done repeatedly on a monthly basis. Any repairs to the roof indicated by the reassessment will be completed, and then et cetera. And then a detailed inspection of all potential illicit entry points within 8 feet of the ground will be completed. That's by May 1st as well. All doors to the building on the basement and first floor levels will be covered with plywood and fastened to eliminate the possibility of entry, with exception of one door. That's by May 15th. This is pretty much the request that Sandy at the town of Sharon had. She wanted to know the list of activities and the date of completion. This is what we get. And that was all on the Adler. But the Columbia has similar issues. And again, with a roof and potential leaks. Just trying to read through this quickly. All doors to the first floor building again. Essentially, it's and sensor alarms. They're doing more of alarm system to install around the property. And I guess they have, and maybe Patsy knows more than I do, but they said apparently they have cameras around the Adler. But also apparently, you know, deer, things like, or animals like deer, trigger it. So alarms go off and neighbors hear them. And I guess it doesn't work very well because it comes a false sense of, well, nothing's really happening because an animal went through there. So they got to tidy up things like that. So that's the type of work they're responsible for. And they want to formalize it, quite frankly.
So we're going to have to make those items a part of the pilot.
Well, I'm glad Joe just joined in, but Joe, I don't know how much you heard, but Sharon Springs Inc., to get their pilot extension, has gone through the municipalities to request such a thing, and an adjustment, quite frankly, Joe. And part of the request from the village and town were to do some maintenance items on the buildings and they have a time frame on that. You know, I think the village and town wants some kind of enforcement mechanism on that, and it actually to become a default if they don't perform. And so I guess the question becomes, is that something we put in the pilot, or is that a side agreement, or whatever's best for all parties involved? I don't know yet.
Yeah, we can certainly prepare a letter agreement that would be a supplement in effect to the pilot agreement. Obviously I haven't seen the terms, so I'm just hearing, you know, the last half of this, frankly. But it's certainly something that we could put together by way of contract and make sure the IDA and the municipalities are, you know, are protected. So the short answer is yes. It might be better to, you said, did they change the payment terms of the pilot agreement?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so I'm not sure if I would want to clutter up, if you will, the terms of the pilot agreement with any kind of local maintenance, local cleanup, but we could certainly do a side agreement that would specify that if those terms aren't satisfied, that there's a default into the pilot agreement, and then we could exercise our remedies.
Yeah, I like the idea of being separate. And actually, I like the idea of maybe relying on code to do the inspection. Either that or we go up there.
No,
Julie's shaking her head, but she's going with me.
Yeah, I would recommend that we be the determiner of whether those tasks have been adequately performed. I would say that we get some sort of, you know, evidence from, you know, the town or the village, whoever it is that's requiring this. But yes, this is something that we can paper. The short answer is yes.
Thanks.
Any more questions on Sharon Springs Inc.?
Just one quick one, Chet. do they have a time limit on when their new financing has to be secured?
Good question.
Great question. And right now, they're asking for a 2-year adjustment, basically, and an extension of getting the work done for 2 years, which is now basically 22 months. You know, when we talked about it, discussed it a couple meetings ago, we suggested to our, at least out loud to Sandy Mackay, that it was going to be the end of this year. And if they didn't fulfill that by then, you know, we would not extend, you know, it wouldn't go any further, the pilot, it would end. Since that date, of course, we've also talked about shortening that time frame to the summer. And our board has not taken an action on that. I know the Sharon Springs folks, as in the municipalities, you know, kind of vary in their time frame. A couple of them suggested that summer wouldn't be such a bad idea this year, and one didn't mind the end of the year as well. So Peter, I guess the long answer to your question, it hasn't been established yet, except for a range apparently between the summer and the end of this year, to give them as a target date. And if they don't meet it, to end the pilot.
Okay.
It will be a decision for us. For instance, I know the town, Sharon, rather have it in the summer, but if we extend it to the end of the year, she does not have, you know, they don't have a problem with that either. So essentially it's going to be our call between what months we want to give them to try to get the financing. You know, summer might be a little pushing it if this is going to be their last ditch effort to get financing. I know Juan and I have talked about, you know, that's 4 months from now, and the application probably be in March. So not sure they could actually complete financing by then. Hello?
Okay. Hi, I'm sorry guys, this is Don Airy. We've been trying to get on the GoToMeeting site, but we've been having trouble met the county, and I apologize for cutting in.
No problem. Now we're just finishing up. We skipped around to wait for solar. So we're just finishing up Sharon Springs Inc. So you're fine. So
Any
Peter,
further questions? Go
that's
ahead.
it. No, that's it, Chet. That's all I had.
That answer your question, Peter?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Any further questions on Sharon Springs Inc.?
Well, then today, do we need to come to a consensus on if we're going to do it, give them to the end of the year then?
I mean, we could if we wanted to, or we could hold off to the next meeting. I mean, if there's a consensus right now, it certainly expedites my process.
And it would also allow Joe to verbalize that in a resolution or whatever.
So,
just from a
we have a
timeline,
motion to that effect?
just from a timeline perspective, they're kind of back to the drawing board in terms of plans, correct?
yes, the village then wanted them to go back to what was already approved. So their plans, it's not quite from the beginning. They did have to step back and reaffirm what they were doing. So it's certainly starting over from a new financial group that they're going to.
And a new construction budget perspective as well?
I think that's it was just done a few months ago. So I think the budget's relatively set at this point.
So if the plans are relatively set and the budget is relatively set, there should be no holdup to them getting financing, aside from the fact that lenders probably aren't financing hospitality right now. And if they're looking at pursuit, you know, they may have personal guarantor issues to work through if their principals are not local. So I don't know how those things tie into, you know, our decision making, but the lending world, especially for hospitality, is not what it normally is.
Which doesn't sound like 4 months is going to be easily done.
I think it's way too soon, the 4 months. I mean, are they at an application even at this point? I'm not sure of that.
No, they're just in contact with them. they have a list of to-dos to get back to the pursuit.
Jeff, you want to put your recommendation in a form of a motion?
Well, I'm not actually a voting person, but based on everything, I think at this point we give them to the end of this calendar year, and yeah, I mean that's basically what the town is, I guess, willing to extend to. So at least that one municipality is saying the same thing.
But yeah, I mean, to be clear, she wouldn't mind it. The town supervisor wouldn't mind it being in the summer, but she wouldn't hold it up and extend it to the year end. And the village was okay initially with year end. So I think everybody sort of wants it to be closer to us, but with this, you know, like the issues Ben brought up and Wanda's thinking about, I don't know, the summer seems awful quick, especially if this is going to be the drop dead one, so to speak.
Ron, does that mean money in hand or a commitment letter? Money in hand?
Well, it's up to us, but I would believe that, you know, I don't know, a commitment letter with conditions probably isn't satisfactory enough. I mean, because the conditions may never be met. So if we go out, if we actually extend it to year end, I think you ought to have, here's the finance.
Yes. Closed.
Yeah.
And if we need to extend it further, if we think it's so promising that we need to extend it further, we could make that decision later. But I agree with Wanda, cash.
I agree.
Did Sandy have anything? Did Sandy have anything in his proposal that listed a date of getting financing?
Well, he wants to, well, his goal is by early summer, so they can be up, you know, they have a year to construct and they would be ready by the following summer. That's his target, Chad. But
wasn't something in there that they needed to be by the end of the year?
I think he referenced our discussion in our meeting from 2 or 3 meetings ago. I'm trying to skim it here. Yeah, he did. We are proposing the following, and one of the conditions is that SSI must procure bank financing no later than December 31st, 2021. That was their proposal to us, and part of that was based on our meeting. I mean, that's where he got it from. So it's in writing.
So do we need to do anything at this point in terms of formalizing that? Since we did request that initially?
Right. I mean, if we stick with that date, Jack, we wouldn't have to do anything more now. If we wanted to change, you know, we'd have to
do it now.
Do it now. Well, we could do it next meeting, but if we did it now, we'd have it ready for next meeting. I mean, if nobody's opposed to that date, then, you know, I think it's fine to go forward with it. If you want more time to think about it or change it, then we can do that as well.
Isn't that what we were talking about just now, is to have it finished by the end of the year?
Yes. I mean, I'm good with it if that's what everybody wants to do.
I think end of the year is a more reasonable proposition. End of the summer, which I would assume means September 21st. There's a lot of stuff to be filtered out between now and then, both the New York State's economy, the national economy, and the world economy. So it may be just a more reasonable position to do it at the end of the year. But it has to be actual financing, not just promises to consider doing this at a future date.
The loan closed, right, Peter? Loan closed, money in hand.
Yes.
Okay.
Sounds like a motion.
So do we need a motion? Are you moving that, Joe?
You're asking me?
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, I'll move it. It's Peter. Peter said it very eloquently, but he could move it, or I could move it, or he could second it, or I can second it.
Is there a second?
I'll defer to Joe and second it.
Okay. I'll move it then.
Motion on the floor to extend financing completion to the end of the year. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Motion carried. Anything else on Sharon Springs, Inc.? Hearing none, let's move to the solar pilot policy. As requested at the end of our last meeting, Joe Scott has prepared a preliminary draft resolution for us to review. Does everybody have that draft resolution in front of them?
Yes.
Joe, could you lead us through this resolution? Also, could you discuss what preliminary approval means?
Sure, Chair. And before I get into the detail, this resolution is a little bit different than what we talked about at the last meeting, and there's an explanation for that. And I think it's important for me to give you the explanation because it kind of sets the stage as to how I approach this. Following the meeting, and perhaps it's something that I missed during the meeting, but I don't think so because I was paying pretty close attention at the meeting as to the discussion. There was an additional provision added, if you will, to the terms of the solar policy to be considered by the IDA. And that additional provision was that the pilot payments received as part of the solar project would be divided 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 among the three jurisdictions, the town, the school, and the county. And the issue that raises is that under the IDA statute says that pilot payments need to be allocated pro rata based on tax rates unless the affected taxing jurisdictions agree to a different allocation. So, and just to give you a little bit of history with respect to that project, there were several IDAs in New York State that were treating some municipalities different than the other municipalities. So, for instance, you'd enter into a pilot agreement with a particular, and I won't use the name of the particular IDA that I know that used to do this. They would enter into a pilot agreement with the developer, and the school would get 10% of the pilot payment, the county would get 10%, and the town would get 80% of the pilot payment. And lo and behold, people complained about that. And so a provision was added to the IDA statute that said that you can't treat people differently, you can't treat municipalities differently than what their pro rata tax rate is, unless, as I said, unless there's a resolution among the three, by the three entities approving that different allocation. So when Ron and I talked about that, it occurred to me that, well, it didn't occur to me, it became clear to me that any pilot agreement that we entered into in connection with a solar project, if it's going to have that allocation, needs to go to each of the taxing jurisdictions in order for it to be approved. So that's going to be every solar project that we do. If we want it to be allocated 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, they need to go to get local approval, regardless of what our policy is. So what I did then was I said, well, if they've got to go to the municipality anyway, or to the three entities anyway, let's have them go and make sure that all the terms, all the relevant terms are approved and agreed to. So if you look at Schedule A to the resolution, and do you all have that available? And hopefully the answer to that is yes, because I'm not good at screen sharing.
Yes.
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 Okay. So if you go to Schedule A, which is page A1, and you'll see at the top of the page, it says new language, right? And then I've got option A. So under option A, don't look at paragraph 1, but look at paragraph number 2, and that's really the meat of option A. Option A says, we will do a pilot agreement for a solar project, but before we enter into the pilot agreement, we need to have a resolution approving the terms of that pilot agreement. That resolution needs to be adopted by the village, the town, the school district, along with the county. And the resolution, and this is clause B, needs to, at a minimum, describe the following: the payment per megawatt, the term of the pilot agreement, the allocation among the taxing jurisdictions, and if there's going to be an escalation clause in the pilot agreement, tell us what the escalation clause is. So basically what option A is, the meat of it is that last 1/3 of the page, if you will, is, well, we will do solar, but we will do solar if there's local approval among the taxing jurisdictions. Bring us the resolutions and we will implement them and approve the pilot. And the reason I went that route is that, like I said, if the county wants 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, then our hands are effectively tied until the project applicant gets the approval of each of those entities. So why should we be in the middle of any of those? If they've got to approve those terms, then have them approve the $20,000 per megawatt, or $5,000 per megawatt, or 8,500, whatever the number is. And if it's going to be a 10-year pilot, have them approve the 10-year pilot. If it's going to be a 30-year pilot, have them approve the 30-year pilot. But what I'm getting at is, if we're getting some direction from the county as to what to do, well, part of it is our hands are tied, because part of what they're telling us to do, we can't do on our own. We need the approvals. So let's have them approve everything. And that way it's very clear. And if the $20,000 changes next year to 18 or 22, then we're out of it. We don't have to amend our policy. It's it's a local decision. There was some discussion at the last, the last board meeting that I attended, that, local control, local decision making. Well, this is the essence of that. I thought it provided you with being responsive to the county board of supervisors, who appoints you all as members of the IDA, and for which you serve at their pleasure. So they don't need much of a reason to replace the board members. I thought this was a good balancing act of a particularly what could be a difficult situation. So that's option A. If you want, I'll go through option B, which is an example of what we've used with at least one of our other IDA clients who has thought really hard about solar projects and has a very involved solar policy. So I'm at your direction, Chair, in terms of how you want me to proceed. And actually, I'm sorry, before I pass it back to you, your question, I'll answer your question. I think you gave me two directions. One, explain, talk about the resolution. And second, explain why it says preliminary. The reason why it says preliminary is that under your uniform tax exemption policy, there's a 30-day notice provision in effect, where we send the pilot, the proposed amendments out to the affected taxing jurisdictions and give them time to approve or to comment on it. So accordingly, this if we adopted something today, it's not going to go into effect until after we get comments from the affected taxing jurisdictions. And so what I have conceptualized, if you will, as the process is that you may take some action today with respect to agreeing on a draft policy. Ron and I will then work on getting it out to the affected taxing jurisdictions. We'll wait the 30 days. Ron will collect the comments. We'll review the comments. We'll report back to you, and then you'll finalize the policy based on those comments. So this is what I would characterize as the preliminary step, the initial step to initiating the process for amending your pilot, your uniform tax exemption policy. And with that, I'll pass it back to you for comment and or questions. And if you want me to go through on a line-by-line basis, option A, and or give a 50,000-foot discussion of option B and some explanation of option B, I'm happy to do that also.
So if I understood you correctly, it's because the county's request included a third distribution of the funds.
Yes.
If the county changed their policy that they're proposing to a pro rata distribution, then option A wouldn't be needed by us. Is that correct?
Well, option A could be simpler. We could say, if it's the sense of the board, we could say, we'll do solar, excuse me, and assuming we get some direction from the county as to the term, we would say, we'll do solar, 20-year term, and $20,000 a megawatt. And then we're done. Or whatever the megawatt is. But I'm always a little nervous about putting a number in there that doesn't move based on, I mean, you don't want a 5-year-old policy with a 5-year-old number in it, So, but yes, the short answer is yes, Chair. The 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 is going to require any pilot agreement that we enter into to be approved by the local jurisdictions.
Mr. Chair,
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
I'm on a cell phone, so I can't see anything on a screen because we couldn't get into the county. This is Don Airy. I guess I should share something, Mr. Chair, if you'd allow me to go into that.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, and thank you, Joe, for that explanation as well. I did, in fact, have an executive session today with the entire Board of Supervisors. And I did, in fact, give them copies of this preliminary Plan A and Plan B, I don't know, resolution, if you will, or policy. I guess I'll just be really direct about it. There was not a great deal of acceptance, and I myself, in speaking to them, concurred. In fact, I had some real misgivings about this, and I'll state those now. And I guess, number one, the whole idea of a fixed minimum per megawatt rate was to extract the towns, number one, from the burden of ongoing, everlasting negotiations. Precisely what is actually happening right now, and Sharon is a good example, the East Point project up there. That's number one. Number two, it was to show solidarity between all the entities in the county that our minimum number was $20,000 per megawatt, but that each town was free to add any escalator and or get a higher number if they can negotiate such a number. And the third part of this, and I understand Joe's position regarding the allocation, in a perfect world, I would see this. You would have the term clearly identified as 20,000 per megawatt. You could have the term of the pilot agreement being 15 or 20 years. That's what solar companies want anyway. And then the issue of the allocation of the pilot payments could then be just simply subject to a resolution singularly dealing with the taxing jurisdictions agreeing to the allocation. For an example, the 1/3, the 1/3, and 1/3. I don't think that is too complicated. I will say this: the board is very firm on not relaxing the $20,000 per megawatt. In fact, the chair of the Board of Supervisors asked for a motion, received a motion, a second, and a secondary unanimous vote supporting resolution number 17, and I guess urging the IDA to follow that lead. Look, it's very possible, to Joe's point, that 5 years from now, maybe the numbers will have changed. But we're faced with an immediate need to deal with solar developers right now. It has arrived. So I understand, option A clearly. I think option A is okay, but I think it should be firm in terms of the minimum requirements, in terms of the per megawatt number. Maybe the term of the pilot agreement can be 15 or 20, as agreed to by resolution of the host community, with a following resolution from the taxing jurisdictions on terms of disbursement. And yes, that particular aspect would have to be done through each host community / developer application to the IDEA. But I mean, personally, I don't see that cumbersome. Again, resolution 17, and I remind everyone, was narrowly written, and it was narrowly written to be very precise in what it says. I appreciate the other aspects of how distribution is made. Those should be handled by resolution and perhaps MOUs as well. But the thrust of this, policy-wise, the board's intention was that the IDA and the Board of Supervisors, representing the towns, unanimously established the minimum standard of $20,000 per megawatt as a pilot.
I think
And that is absent on option A, clearly. And I'll comment on option B just briefly, that I really do not like the idea of segregating size of project to separate rates of taxation. That's very complex. I think it's unfair to a developer in some ways. I don't see the relevancy of it, and to establish a to be negotiated number at 25 megawatts or greater puts us in a quagmire again of what we're dealing with in Sharon Springs. I mean, the town of Sharon with East Point Energy. Makes it really complicated and puts that burden again of those negotiations directly back from square one on each town, which lacks administrative capacity and the ability and legal support to do these things. So I guess that's my overall comment on the proposal.
May I ask a question of both Joe and Don, Peter Johnson? One of the things that I took away from Joe's presentation is that that pro rata was in fact something that is required by state law. Is that correct, or did I not understand you properly? In other words, a pro rata allocation is required by state law?
It is. It is, but as I also indicated, it can be changed. That allocation can be changed if there's a resolution of each of the affected taxing jurisdictions.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe Joe ought to run through the option B just briefly. I don't think it'd take too long.
Is that the sense of the board?
I mean, does everybody else want that, or does everybody understand what it is?
Well, I'd appreciate that.
Sure. Okay. So, and again, I understand Don's points about the about option B. Option B is not at all what the county well, actually, option B is closer to what the county asked us to do last 2.5-3 weeks ago. The numbers, if you go to page A2, you see in the table there, I eliminated the numbers per megawatt. The county IDA that has this policy, the first number 0 to 4.9 megawatts is $6,000. The next was 7,500. The next was 9,000, and then larger ones are to be negotiated. And candidly, it does add a level of complexity, but I mean the amount of power generated by these facilities is something that they certify to on an annual basis, and therefore it doesn't, it's fairly clear where they fall into that range. I'm giving you those numbers just so you know what other IDA, or at least one other IDA, collects. I guess the things that I would like to highlight in this language is one that I'm sorry, I'll get the language for you here. If you're on the bottom of page A2, and if you look 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 lines up from the bottom, so just that line just below the table, it says that those payments are to be increased by 3% a year. So there's an escalator in this pilot agreement, which obviously is very good for the municipalities. There's also, again, on page A2, 2 lines from the bottom in that paragraph where the table is, it says the agency receives a letter of support from the town, the city, town, or village in which the project's located. So this IDA won't do a solar project unless the town, the city, or village in which the project's located delivers to the IDA a letter of support. And then if you go to the bottom, again, the bottom of page A2, 2, 4, 5 lines from the bottom, it makes clear that those payments are distributed pro rata based on the pro rata tax rates of each of the affected taxing jurisdictions. So and again, I'm not what I'm trying to do is give you all background as to what's being done statewide, just so that you're in a better position to make a an educated discussion or an educated decision with respect to the matter.
Joe, I have a question right on the at the top of paragraph 2 in option B, where it says the initial period shall be 25 years. Meaning that's not is that the pilot 25 years?
This county IDA does 25-year pilot payments, and you're right, Joe. I should have pointed that out also. And that, candidly, has been our experience with solar projects. They look for the pilot to be approximately the term of the financing.
But this is, going back to the similarity, Joe, this is where if you were to go with the 20,000 per megawatt, this is where it would fit in. Whether you broke it off into 4 sections or if you just said all projects are treated equally, that's
Exactly.
where it would fit in.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I would, if you want it to be uniform for all size projects, you just eliminate the first column. Yeah.
I mean, I'll just interject with the permission of the chair and the board's indulgence. That would be something I think that the Board of Supervisors would be much more comfortable with, because again, I've got an agreement, the county has an agreement signed as an example from NextEra for a 3.5 megawatt project at $18,000 per megawatt. Again, the Bird's Eye project is a different size project at $15,000 per megawatt, but that's a closely hatched number. And again, our numbers were researched; they weren't arbitrary, as I think Ron can attest. They were not arrived at in a cavalier fashion, and the trend of the numbers is to go up. So that's why we reached the minimum of 20. In terms of the term, I don't know. I don't have a problem with 15 to 20, but 25 is a long time. I'm sorry.
Don, may I ask a question?
Yes.
To be honest, and I don't practice in solar every day. I mean, we have a renewable energy group that
I know
that does great and does a lot of this work. And I have an associate, Mike Logan, and a partner, Chris Canada, who do a lot of solar projects, and actually another partner, Nadine Ziegler. But candidly, I don't know if we've done a deal with a per megawatt charge of $20,000. We've done a lot. And
no, Joe, that's a good point. And you know what? I've been beating around this a little bit, and my own Board of Supervisors asked me to bring it up, so I guess I should. And I don't feel good about this, but Hudson Russ has a renewables energy group, let's call it. And I know their business is to represent developers, is to represent investors, is to instruct them and guide them through the process of carbon credits and cap and trade and all those aspects of the developer's side of the business. And I get that, and I appreciate that. We know that there's no county at the present time that has a policy for 20,000 megawatt, $20,000 per megawatt. We do know there are counties speaking about $15,000 per megawatt. And we understand that we are being proactive. And we understand that we are being proactive to ensure our taxpayers and then safeguard our taxpayers' interest in this industry and the application of this industry, whether it's by imposition or invitation. And I can't tell you of a project that's been invited in by a town board. I mean, that I can say with certainty in the county of Schoharie. So, yeah, Joe, you're going to be able to make a successful argument that we would be, if not the first, one of the first counties to adopt such a policy. That, yes, we would be leading. We would be leading on that. There's no question about it. So I totally, unabashedly, as a supervisor and chair of the Energy Committee, admit that. And I feel stronger about it today than I even did last week after receiving, let's put it this way, a draft verbal appraisal report from Sanssouci, who's doing the appraisal on the East Point Energy Project. It was a very enlightening call, and I don't have to bore you folks with all that was said, except to simply say the amount of revenue that is realized from developers does not make the $20,000 per megawatt a hardship in any way, shape, or form. And George Sanssouci is willing to stand in front of the IDA and stand in front of the Board of Supervisors as a qualified appraiser and consult on this. I mean, again, we've put a lot of energy. I'll speak for myself. I've put a ton of energy into this. But again, Joe, I'm not going to debate it. You're absolutely correct. Schoharie County would be leading the way in terms of what I consider fair and just compensation in the interest of the county taxpayers.
And Don, I don't take offense to anything that you said, and you seem to suggest that because I have a renewable energy group that maybe I'm not, and I would take offense to that I'm not.
I do not. I'm being very, I do not.
Okay, because I'm representing the Schoharie County IDA here, and I want to make sure.
I understand that. And Joe, I want to tell you this. Since we're being candid, it was an executive session, so I'm probably saying too much already, but I will say this, and I won't name names. The issue was brought up, and you can, and trust me when I say this, I'm not asking you to trust me very much except in this. I was not going to go down that path, and I cut that path off.
Well, I hope so, because that's not the case, and I would take offense to that. I'm representing the IDA here. We represent the IDA, 20 IDAs throughout the state. We look out for their interest in connection with these solar projects. The renewable energy group that we have in our office helps us by way of on technical issues. And I just wanted to make sure that we were all clear on what the numbers are, and what the numbers are out there in the real world, if you will.
Yes, and I acquiesce to that, Joe.
I'm probably being too sensitive, but I just want to make sure the IDA members recognize that I'm not none of my recommendations here. And you'll note I'm not really recommending a number. What I'm really doing, and I've been very blunt with Ron on this point, is that I've really, if the municipalities, and in particular the county, has such a strong view on what the number should be, then let's let them set those terms. And that's why I cast option A the way I did, because views change. I try to keep my clients out of the spotlight, and frankly, generally, what I've seen over the last 5 years is that, at the risk of being flippant, IDAs seem to be the cause of all the world's problems. I mean, we're the cause of the Middle East conflict. We're the cause of climate change. We're the cause of the log jam in Congress, and even people that you would think would like us. business people. Well, we don't give enough financial assistance. Local governments. Well, you're too local. You don't look at things from a statewide standpoint. So what I try to do is keep my clients out of the spotlight, out of the gun sight, if you will, and that's why I crafted option A the way I did, because I thought, look, if there's strong local views on what these terms should be, well, let's let the locals set those terms and we'll implement them. We have the power to implement, and that's why it's set up the way it is. But if the board, feels comfortable with what the county is suggesting, and as long as we pull out and make clear that the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 is something that has to be approved at the local level, and you tell us what the term should be, then, and if the board goes along with this, we'll implement the policy in that fashion. But I just wanted to make sure that we were all clear as to what is out there, and I appreciate your candor on that. And then the board needs to give some thought as to what to do.
No, Joe, absolutely no disagreement there. I guess we're in agreement in that regard. I guess if I have one last, you're right. If I don't want the IDA to be in the spotlight or be accused of the Mideast crisis. I mean, that's the last thing I want. Nor do I want the taxpayers to be shortchanged, if you will. I just can't get away from this. When we take the $20,000 per megawatt number and we apply it to what the appraised value, which I now know what the East Point Energy appraised value is, this is hard for me to get over, guys, and I hope you can appreciate where I'm coming from. It represents close to an 80 to 90% tax break for the developer. Who's being harmed here? That's tough. I have to stand before, at some point, the press or a taxpayer who says, what the hell are you guys at the Board of Supervisors doing to afford a non-long-term job creating entity such a heavily discounted tax structure? So we have exposure too, Joe. I guess we all do. And in that regard, I don't want to be that guy either. I don't want to have to stand in front of, when this boardroom gets filled, which it will be, COVID will end, and have to answer those questions and stand there and, quite frankly, not have a viable reason. Even at $20,000 per megawatt, as a minimum, it's not a great deal for the taxpayers of Schoharie County. It's still a great deal for the developer in terms against full assessment. It's certainly not a great deal for the taxpayers. It's just less of a bad deal. And I've said that before, and nothing's changed. And with Sansucci's report will be out next week. He's promised that he'll have the appraisal report. When you look at those numbers and some of the calculations, such as that, next year is going to get, the second they create electricity, they're going to get a 25% ITP tax credit, which is going to be somewhere around $25 million up front. I just don't know how I defend that to the taxpayers of the county. So I think it's a good rate. I don't think it's a hardship to a developer. So, that's my position. It really hasn't changed. If anything, and I said this to the board today in executive session, I gave them those numbers, and every head in the room was pretty solemn about it. NYSERDA does what it does. They make recommendations. And again, no one's ever been able to explain to me that $3,100 recommendation. I haven't had anybody tell me how they got to that. I don't really care. I care about Schoharie County. I care about the taxpayers' money. I care about the needs for EMS, EMT. Their needs are many. The revenue streams are small. This is just one that I think is not unfair. I think it's very fair. I think it's more than fair to a developer when you go against full assessment. So That's the tenor of the board, and I'll say it, that's the tenor from myself.
Don, I have a question. Supposing NextEra said, I don't want the pilot. And what I will do in this project is to have minimal real property. In other words, the solar stuff would be mostly personal property, which is not taxed. And so I don't want the pilot, and I will be willing to go through certiorari proceedings and that would say that I should be taxed on land plus very minimal improvements, real property improvements to that land. Is that a possibility that you see?
I never try to dictate what a corporation or a personal person would do in terms of filing any sort of action, request, or business plan. Certainly, they could have a go at it. Hey, I suppose they could ask to be paid to come here. I mean, the sky's the limit, I suppose. And I'm not trying to be flippant, you know, as well. I simply think that the approach, their approach for that, if that was a viable approach, I think that would be a normal and regular approach by every solar developer. I think they understand the risks of that. I think they understand the lack of viability of such an approach. But again, I'm not going to assert what they would or would not do. I mean, I'll use NextEra in Sharon because I'm familiar with them. They've been very difficult to sit in a room with. So I don't know what they would do. I mean, I don't know how to answer that. Certainly, they could try anything. Well, I've heard the approach. They say, oh, solar panels are movable.
Right.
They're
That's
portable equipment. You know, I mean, it's bolted down to a concrete pedestal. The argument is the concrete movable? That's a foundation. When you make a foundation and you bolt something to it, is it now portable or mobile? I don't know. That's for attorneys to decide, perhaps in a courtroom, or I don't know. But well, heretofore, solar companies have adopted pilots.
Keep in mind that solar is exempt under real property law, section 487. So it is considered real property. So I don't think that they'd be able to go that way, but you never know.
Okay. Yep. Yeah, it's hard to say what any entity would do. I learned that today in executive session with 3 different topics. Trust me. So yeah, it's really difficult. So I guess I shouldn't even assert, but I don't see that happening. I guess that would be my comment. I don't see that approach. I see an approach to enter into pilots, and I've got ongoing negotiations with other solar companies that are, quite frankly, have been much more, what's the word I want to use? They've gone a lot smoother, let's say, than the NextEra project. And there's been an acceptance, without giving away too much information, of the numbers that are being thrown around, including paying pre-application fees. That I can say, and my limited experience of projects in Schoharie County.
John, did you say the last time that the towns in Schoharie County had opted out of that rural property tax law 487?
Yeah, most of the towns have. Is this Mr. Burton?
Yes.
Yes, I'm sorry, I'm not on the screen. So yes, I don't know exactly how many towns, but most towns have. I know the county as a entity has done that. So yeah, there would have to be, on a pilot agreement, there would have to be that cumbersome, if a little bit cumbersome, if you will. They'd have to sort of, and Joe would probably have a better term for this than me. Yeah, they have to opt back in.
Maybe Joe, could you discuss rural property tax law 487 and the advantages and disadvantages of opting out of that?
Well, generally, what 487 says is that solar projects are exempt completely from real property tax. And so unless the taxing jurisdictions opted out. So what we have generally found is that they opt out because they want to collect something. So the state's policy, if you will, on this was to put the onus on the the taxing jurisdictions to take action, and otherwise, if they didn't take any action, the solar companies would be paying zero on the increased assessed value due to the undertaking of the solar project. So what you generally see in New York State is that the municipalities have opted out, and that can be interpreted a couple of different ways. We're working on a project in the Hudson Valley where the municipality opted out because they don't want any solar at all. But in other jurisdictions, they've opted out because they want to collect something. And so what they do is they either enter into a host community benefit agreement with the solar company, or they coordinate with the IDA to make sure that some reasonable amount of money is collected with respect to a float agreement for the benefit of the municipalities.
Well described, Joe. And I think that really illustrates where Schoharie. I'll speak for the Board of Supervisors a little bit, and I think that's where we are. I don't like the idea, and I'll say this out loud, using opting out, if you will, going full assessment to try and, let's put it this way, hamstring a developer from coming into a town. I'm not a proponent of that. I'm not an obstructionist, and I don't think anybody on the Board of Supervisors is obstructionist in that regard. I'm taking a stab at that. So yeah, by establishing a fair minimum, which we think is where the 20,000 per megawatt comes in, we kind of make that compromise. We don't want to be obstructionist. We don't want to use opt-out as a zoning tool. Instead, we want to opt out and then enter into a host community agreement, a pilot agreement in conjunction with the IDA, but at the proper level, not at some unrealistic 96% tax reduction. I guess we're trying to find that sweet spot, if you will.
Okay, I guess I have a question here for you, Joe Scott. Between option A and option B, if we were to follow the county's position on this with the 20,000 megawatts and the years of term, and any escalator clause that may or may not be put in here, which one of these would we be following?
Well, probably what I would do, Chair, is probably mark up option B and delete the rows there, the first column. So on page A1, I would delete, in that table, I would delete the first column and then just say amount per megawatt, $20,000 per megawatt. I would probably leave the language in there about being a pro rata allocation, but then I would say unless modified by resolution of each of the affected taxing jurisdictions, right? I would change the 25 years to, and I've kind of lost track of where the county is on that. Was it 15 that you wanted, Don?
Joe, we feel on that one, I think we defer to the IDA as well, but I think to accommodate what we think is an industry need, a 15 or 20, I think is where we were at. We didn't want to dictate those terms to a developer, knowing that, or at least put it this way, we've heard more than anecdotally that a 10-year pilot doesn't work for a solar developer. I mean, how do you feel about that?
Oh, I agree. I agree. So maybe what we would do then, Chair, is say an amount, a term not to exceed 20 years. So I would change the 25 to 20. I'll refer to you about the letter of support from the locals. I think that helps us. I mean, in terms of my representation of you, it certainly would be nice to get a letter from the town supervisor or the town board saying, hey, we support this project. So option B would be with those modifications. That's what I would do. And, you know, I mean, again, I think we've all been, and I've actually enjoyed talking to Don on these issues, even though it appears at times maybe to you all that we're on different sides. We're not, I don't think we're on significant different sides. He's been very polite. I think I've been polite. What you could do here, Chair, is have me modify option B to reflect this discussion, and then we send it out. And, you know, no telling. And then what I would recommend you to do is maybe have, you know, a developer come in and or NYSERDA come in and say, hey, you know, we kind of want to be cutting edge here in Schoharie County. We want to be leading the charge, but are we leading the charge or are we killing projects? You know, and you'll be able to get, you know, and people will come in and talk to you. And that would help you in the deliberative process.
And adding on to that, perhaps maybe also, you know, you bring in, I mean, the appraiser, Susie. He's under contract with the county. He's certainly willing to do it. I will tell you, he knows his numbers. But I mean, look, I'm not going to fight that. I mean, if it goes out for public comment and public comments come back and dictate that's the way we should go. Look, I mean, I can't stand in the way of that. You guys have to put this out there anyway for public content.
Right. That would be that would meet our requirement anyway, correct?
Yeah. So again, I mean, do I want to invite developers in? Do I want to invite Sanssouci in? Do I want to invite NYSERDA in? I don't know if that's the right term. Joe and I can disagree maybe on semantics, but put it out there and see what the public support is, or the public rejection of it. Sure, why not?
So the towns are already passing an MOU based on the county proposals or the county resolution. So I think to the extent that the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 is potentially not supported, I don't think that that's going to be the case. From what I've heard, the school districts are relatively all on board. I haven't heard anybody who's you know, in opposition so far. So I think that part will take care of itself. You know, when I read this, my initial thoughts as we've been talking through this is $20,000 is kind of that minimum threshold. That's the year one threshold, probably with a 2% escalator, a 20-year term, and somewhere between years 11 and 20, we should start to see the traditional step up in pilot valuations. If this is, you know, if this is 40%, maybe in year 11, it's 50%, and it's whatever percentage, 5% from there on out until we've reached full assessed value of the project. I think that's kind of where I was hoping we'd get to with a pilot schedule.
I mean, that can certainly be part of the discussion.
Well, what's the pleasure of the board here? Shall we have Joe modify this to reflect what the county's after here?
I agree with that. In the to reflect the discussion, as Joe himself said, 15 to 20 years, the minimum of 20,000 per meg. The escalator, I'm not sure if you do 2 or 3. 3 sounds okay. The thing that hangs me up here a little bit is getting direction from the taxing jurisdictions about the allocation, when that needs to be included in the discussion. So I'm just not sure about that. But it appears that if Ben is correct, and I know the town of Schoharie has already done this, and they've already had a conversation with both the county and the Schoharie Central School. If people are comfortable with that, and that's the case throughout the county, then the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 looks like it would work. I have a sense that it may not work in all cases, but that's not for the IDA to decide. That's for the taxing jurisdictions to decide, and I think we need to go about doing that. So I'm supportive of a rewrite of option B to reflect what I'm hearing is pretty much the consensus of the IDA board.
Anyone else have comment?
I will say, I mean, going back to Peter's point on just the breakdown, not to
Right.
belabor it, but we could, if you got to go to the municipalities anyway, and I don't think it necessarily has to be written in right now on that. I mean, you got to have approval from them no matter when you go there. So if it's in a general sense, I think there's got to be more discussions on that breakdown anyway. And it could just be left for comment period. So we have 45 days to filter it out or whatever. The other 3 points are, you know, what should be decided on here.
Other 3 points meaning what? Which
The
are you
minimum,
referring
I mean, the minimum and the 2% or 3. I guess we'll stick with 3 for now. And the term being up to 20 years.
Or no minimum, right? Or you go to option A,
Correct.
which
thought we were-
has no minimum, and the resolution comes back and tells us what they want. I think that's.
Well, again, guys, that really creates, that doesn't move the ball up the hill that the Board of Supervisors is trying to move up the hill. If we go back to that, it's a free, and I don't mean this term the way it might sound, but I'm going to use this term. We go back to free for all, where every developer comes in and every town sits down, and the developer has no concept walking in the door, or has a concept of, I'm going to pay $3,000 a megawatt, endless discussions, endless negotiations, sucking up administrative capacity, town board energy, of which we all know we don't have enough of. And besides, again, I've tried to make the case for the minimum of $20,000. It lets a developer know up front, this is what our county wants. We set the tax rates as the taxing jurisdictions. I do think there's one thing about this process that I've seen, not just in this state, but in other states. When it comes to renewable energy, it's the developers come in and they start telling the taxing jurisdictions what they're going to pay. That seems backwards to me. It always has. I think we need to take a position. I think the IDA needs to take a position, and I'm hoping that the IDA will take a position that is supportive of the Board of Supervisors positions after a year of really looking at this and hearing a lot of input, talking to a lot of towns, and being in negotiations. That would be my hope, rather than leaving it open-ended here we go, another town by town by town basis. little towns that have just so little resource in handling things like this. I can speak for my little town of Blenheim. When we were into the NIPA negotiations, it sucked the air out of my ability to do anything else. I have a FEMA appeal. FEMA has come back way before my time. They've come back and they want to get $100,000 back from the town of Blenheim for a flood project. And we're gonna appeal it. Clearly, we think we're gonna win. We're gonna appeal it. I have 60 days, and I can tell you, gentlemen, this. It is not on the town board. It is on me as a supervisor and maybe one other town board member and a town clerk. It's going to literally take the air out of everything else for 3 months. And this is what happens with solar. It just is what it is. I think Alan Taverner will tell you that in Schoharie. I think that certainly Sandra Manko would tell you that up in Sharon. So in a way, and I'm not speaking for the board, but I think I can say this with validity. We're asking for the IDA for assistance. We're asking for an IDA for help and support in what we think is a reasonable, fair pilot for solar development, and help us cut through a lot of the chaff, angst, and time-consuming negotiations. We'll know a lot if a developer comes in, knows we're at 20, walks through. We know he's interested. We know they can pay it. They're willing to be a partner. I think that's really important.
I have another question on option Schedule A, first option. Is that means that the resolution that we would be required would include the county, Joe, wouldn't it, Joe Scott? So that if the county, somebody comes in, developer comes in and says, hey, you know what, it's going to be $15,000, take it or leave it. And county comes back and says no. So what have we lost? Because the resolution includes the county and includes the town who voted, the town supervisor voted with the county board of supervisors. So these constituencies are included even in Schedule A without setting a limit. Supposing somebody wants, instead of 18, I mean, that's my issue with this. That the county and the town is not losing anything by putting an amount that is higher than any other county in the area. Don, you said you're leading the way. Well, so that might be construed by the state, who is one of our stakeholders, is not leading the way. That could be construed as saying, hey, we don't want you guys here. We don't want solar here. And I'm sure that's not the intent.
Well, it isn't the intent, I can't tell what the state to think. All I can do is go back to that number, and when I take that number against assessment on an appraised value project, the numbers just don't lie. It is by far, in my opinion, by far the most generous, even at 20,000, Joe. It's the most generous pilot I think anyone would ever conceive of offering for a development that really doesn't meet a lot of what pilots were intended to serve. Job creation being, of course, probably the biggest one. So again, I don't know how the state will think about that. I don't know. And I'll offer this. In terms of setting the standard and putting a minimum requirement, let's take a walk down that lane for a minute of speculation. And okay, a developer comes into town and says, look, 18 and I just can't do anymore. Well, look, clearly a town would still have the ability to tell the developer, look, we'll support you if you want to put in a pilot application for 18. We don't know what'll happen, but we'll support it. They're not precluded from doing that. It may not pass, it may not be accepted, but I think the likelihood of a project not going forward, but because they can only go 15. And by the way, I've heard this before. I heard from a developer, 4,000 is as much as we can possibly go. We told them to go back. 2 weeks later, that number was doubled. And that number's higher now than it was than the 4. So what's my point? My point is this. If a developer comes in and can certainly pay 15, if they can pay 18, 20 is, again, I keep saying it, it's not going to be a hardship. But they could still put an application in. That particular town could support it. And that particular town supervisor, just like I, or just like Joe Scott or Ron Filmer or yourself, stand in front of the Board of Supervisors and make the case. I think the board is reasonable. And if the case is made well and it's compelling and it's justifiable, I don't think the board would vote to deny it. Let's put it that way. But that to me is a thought out approach, and a compelling argument could be made. Let them make the argument. I mean, I'm certainly making the argument. So, I mean, I don't see $18,000 or $15,000 as opposed to 20 in the scope of a project's value, in the scope of a project's appraised value of its revenue, the tax credits they're getting already. It's just not that significant in the scope of a viable financial proposition.
Well, just point of information.
Help me out with this. Go ahead.
If we put 20,000 in our policy, and someone comes to us and asks for 18, and we decide to go 18, we would need to get the approval of all of the county, the school, and the town.
That's correct.
Yeah.
The Board of Supervisors really doesn't enter into the picture.
Yeah, that's the county, Chet. I mean, that would be their vote.
Right, the county. Well, are we talking about the county as a whole or the supervisor?
Both, actually, I think, right, Joe? I mean, it's the town itself, and then the whole supervisor board of the county as an entity.
Right, it would be the Board of Supervisors, the town board, and the Board of Education.
And the
Let's
village
do it.
board, if there was.
If it happens to be.
Let me understand that, because I'm having a process issue. I support most of what Don has said and what Ben have said, but with each application, under Don's theory of the case, what he's hoping is that they are not going to. Their first stop is at the IDA. It's not at the town. Is that what you're thinking, or the town simply says, when they come in, go talk to Ron Filmer?
Is that directed at me?
Yeah. Yes.
Is that correct? Oh, okay. Thanks, Pete. And I'm guessing that's Pete. Am I correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Sorry. Well, I think it's a bilateral application there, because there has not been consistency on when and how a solar developer approaches a town. And by the way, that's a very good segue to one other point that was missed. A lot of towns, not a lot of towns, the towns are opting out for another reason. The Dryden case, which, Joe, I know you're familiar with. The developer made a successful argument in court that they had made contact with a town prior to 60 days. 60 days had elapsed, and the town had not opted out of real property tax law, and therefore they were found to be compliant and being tax exempt. So, and then here's the other issue with that. What does contact constitute? There's an issue, what if a developer goes to a town board member Is that contact? What if they go to a planning board member? Is that contact? Or the code enforcement officer? Is that contact? Or the supervisor? So there was another reason for opt-out, and that was a protective approach to making sure that doesn't happen. That was catastrophic for the town of Dryden. And then Pete, going further back to your initial point, the town, I think, this is how I would see it coming down based on how it usually comes down. Usually the developer shows up and goes to the town. Now, being equipped with a comprehensive IDA policy, a comprehensive and straightforward Board of Supervisors, county, if you will, resolution that dictates the 20. He shows up, he knows it's 20. This developer knows this, walks into the room of town supervisor. The town has a great piece of leverage now, and I don't think it's unwieldy leverage. The town can say, you know where we stand as an IDA, you know where we stand as a town. Have you looked at the numbers? You're in the business. It's your business model. It's your business. Does 20 work or not? And at that point, if a developer says 20 doesn't work, only 10 does, or only 6 does, that's not even close. However, again, if a developer can make a compelling and saleable and defensible argument of why he can't go 20, but he can go 18, I have to believe as a county and as an IDA, we can work that problem. And we're bound to listen to that argument. Doesn't mean we're going to approve it, but certainly it would not preclude a developer and or a town supervisor from supporting that developer and walking in the room and standing before this board and standing before your board and saying, this is why I simply can't live with 20 and I've got to have 18. Now, if he comes in and says, I got to have 5, I think we all agree on that. Hopefully that's just so out of the range that, that's not realistic as a proposal. But I'm trying to look for solutions, not roadblocks with this. I'd like to see what happens when we put out 20, because slowly but surely, solar companies are having to become more competitive. Grid space isn't being made every day. Land isn't being made every day. Our county right now is becoming, every day that goes by, in a better position because we have a product. Why would we not market our product for what we think it's worth? Land, grid capacity, et cetera, et cetera. But why wouldn't we? I'd like to see what the reaction is, and when we have a partnership with the IDA and the county on this, and we put forth 20,000 per megawatt, let the comment period come in. I'm confident that we're going to have developers come in and they're going to say, we want to do this, and we want to do it in Schoharie County, and you're valuable to us, and we'll pay you, because we still know we're getting a great deal off a full assessment. Okay. And that's how we serve our taxpayers.
All right, time is moving here. I think we need to get some decision on this. Help me out with this in terms of process at this point. We need to make a decision on whether we have fixed amounts or no amounts. That's one issue. We also have the issue of having either option A or B being modified to incorporate that decision. And then once that's done, do we have to come back and then approve the document that is revised? That's a question.
Yeah. Should one of us put that in the form of a motion, Chet?
Sure, that's fine. Go ahead, Joe.
As the person who's going to be drafting this and looking for some direction, I think there's, and I've been taking notes. I think where you are is a term not to exceed 20 years, a 3% escalator, a $20,000 a megawatt payment, and a pro rata allocation unless they go to the affected taxing jurisdictions and get approval for something different, which would include the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. If I understand that, and I can modify option B to reflect that, and we could take a motion, could have a motion and move forward, and then Ron and I will work to put together, notices out to the affected taxing jurisdictions, and we can get this ball rolling. As your counsel, I would recommend that you have some quote hearings on this, because I just think that, and this is based on my experience, that the $20,000 is so different from what we're seeing out there in the world. And you want to have some support for that, because I think Joe alluded to the fact that you have a number of different stakeholders. You definitely have stakeholders locally, but you also have stakeholders statewide and nationally. And while the national stakeholders are probably tenuous, you do have statewide stakeholders, which includes state agencies and the governor's office. And you want to make sure that you're not so far out of bounds with respect to what you should be asking for, that you don't inadvertently curtail development as opposed to promote development. I think Don has made a number of good points about how a 3,000 per megawatt or a 5,000 per megawatt is a significant discount off of real property taxes. I would actually like to see those numbers, and I would also like to make sure that the way we're looking at this is that while the discount off your real property tax number is something that you should be thinking about, one of the other reasons why pilots are being offered is that you want to make sure that the developer is going to undertake the project. And the developer is only going to undertake the project if the developer is getting a certain rate of return. And you don't want the rate of return, and this I think is Don's point, and I support it 100%. In fact, I support it 150%, is that if the developer is making money hand over fist, then the developer should be able to afford to pay a higher pilot payment. We have IDAs that do housing projects in their inner city core where they do 28-year pilots, and the project applicant pays a fraction, and I'm talking 5, 10, 15% of what the normal taxes would be. And the reason why that IDA does those projects is that they've looked at the pro forma of that developer, and they've looked at their tax base and their tax rates, which are incredibly high, and they know that that developer wouldn't do that project without that pilot agreement. And they know, because they've looked at the pro forma, that they're not giving away the store, and they've had a third-party consultant come in and say, you've got to do this if you want housing to be developed in your downtown inner city core.
This isn't housing.
I understand that. I understand that, but it's the same concept.
It's not. This produces no jobs. This produces no economic development to the town beyond taxation.
No,
this is not economic development.
It is a very similar concept, and I mean, you're the client, so I don't want to argue with you, but when we do a housing project in downtown ABC City, there's 0 jobs being created by that housing project. it's creating downtown traffic, it's creating foot traffic, it's
Sales
creating,
tax, right, all the contingencies, correct.
right. But so it's not right on point with solar, but the issue is the economics and the math is very similar. It's, are people willing to do the project? And they're only willing to do the project if they make a certain level of money. And profit is not a bad thing. Undue profit that's burdensome to the taxing jurisdictions, that is a problem. And I agree with you 100% on that. And that's why looking at the pro forma and seeing, hey, you know, this developer can afford $20,000 a megawatt. Well, if that's the case, God bless. But if the project doesn't work because $20,000 a megawatt is too high, the developer's not going to do the project.
I think the one difference here as well is, Joe, one more argument point, I guess, since we're jousting and it's all good. There's another important thing that nobody's thinking of, and I don't like to say it, but look, I'm going to say it. The tenor in the county and the towns is they're not pining for solar projects. They're not.
And
town supervisors they're applying for grant money. They're applying for businesses to come in. They're not going to solar companies and saying, "Oh, please come in," because they know the battle they're going to be in, and they know the high rate of unacceptance by the public. Look, it's going on in Schoharie. It's going on in Sharon. Look, I'm trying to avoid all that. But in this discussion, I don't think it can be avoided. There's a certain resentment of these projects that's very real. I'm not saying it's justified. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but it exists. Again, I think the parallel with a housing project where you bring in people and you create economic activity as an economic generator, I don't see solar being in that class. I mean, not at all.
Oh, and I agree with you 100% in terms of the local issues with respect to solar. Montgomery County IDA. They have a policy. We're not doing solar, period. Zero, nada. But you have some people at the local level and at the state level that say, hey, climate change is a problem. We should be doing everything that we can to promote solar. And in some jurisdictions that we work with, there's a significant community that says, you know, I can't keep the family farm unless we do this solar project. So,
well, then I would suggest, Joe. Then I would suggest something. Then, if we're gonna take that segue, then maybe the solar developers should really start paying the landowners what they deserve, because that argument is extremely weak, and it doesn't keep people farming. It stops people from farming because they stiff the check, as meager as it is, and it's enough because of the hardship and pressures on farming. So that's a business decision between a developer and a landowner. And I don't want to get into that, and I don't think the IDA does, and I know the Board of Supervisors doesn't. So, you know, I think farmers and landowners that lease their property or sell their land, I think they've been taken to the cleaners. And I think they should do a lot better. I really think they should do a lot better. But I can't control that. I don't think the IDA can. When you look at the numbers of what solar companies are paying to lease and buy land, it's pretty depressing. It's pretty sad. But again, you can't control everything, including, as you pointed out, Joe, the IDA can't get blamed for the Mideast crisis either. But we can't cover all those bases. We just can't. Those are personal business decisions in a private sector. Private sector negotiation. I'd love to see them get a lot more, and I think they should, but I can't do that for them, and none of us can.
Well, good. This is an excellent discussion. In my previous life, I remember running into the question of how much we were paying the executive director of a not-for-profit. and the guy was pulling down a rather large amount of money, and we realized that we were going to run into big problem for excessive inurement. Right now, one of the questions that I have is, are the solar companies being excessively inured for what is not a terribly large risk because of the incredible subsidies that have been provided by both federal and state governments? So I think the idea of a public hearing is a great idea because all of these other issues, I'm a believer that climate change is occurring, but I think everybody's got to sacrifice and everybody's got to benefit. And I think what we're trying to do here is ensuring that in the absence of real economic development and job creation in Schoharie County, that the people of Schoharie County will in fact benefit at least in one way from a pilot. So, and those are the kinds of statements and ideas that can come out in a public hearing in order for the public to be better educated about exactly what's going on.
Are we ready? Why am I?
You're on mute. You're on mute, Chet.
You're on mute, Chet.
I think it's time to call the question. I'm still getting back to process here, and since you're putting this together, Joe, and what is it that we need to do at this point as far as the data that's being put into the document, and also acceptance or rejection of that?
Well, I think what the sense of the board is, I think, and I'm saying that very respectfully, because not all of you have spoken, is that I will eliminate option B. I'm sorry, eliminate option A, and tailor option B to a $20,000 per megawatt, a 3% escalator, a term not to exceed 20 years, and a provision that if it's a sense of the affected taxing jurisdictions and the developer that they want to change the allocation, that they need to go back to the affected taxing jurisdiction to get a resolution.
Good.
Is that your resolution, Pete? I mean,
Yes.
And we're talking about the,
motion.
And then with respect to the process,
is this, go ahead.
and then with respect to process, we will, we'll send the materials out to all the affected taxing jurisdictions. I think, Ron, what I'm hearing is that they'd like a public hearing. And then I don't know if I need to necessarily put in the resolution, but I can if you want, that you'll invite professionals on all sides here to comment, either at the public hearing or at a meeting or two of the IDA, to make sure that you're getting enough information so that you're comfortable with the decision that you're going to make.
In terms of steps, do we do the consider the revised option B first, and then have a public hearing as a result of that prior to our adoption of it?
Yeah, Peter, I'm sorry. I didn't quite follow that. Would you mind repeating that?
In terms of steps, obviously, getting a revised option B along the lines that you've indicated is the first step. Would we then, prior to adoption, hold a public hearing for public comment?
No, because this is designed to be preliminary.
Okay.
right? So after the public hearing and after hearing the professionals, assuming that you want to hear professionals, then you'll finalize.
Okay.
So now, I feel comfortable as your counsel that there's enough definitiveness of what we've talked about that you could adopt this preliminary resolution today. I mean, you could say, hey, Joe, go back and draft this up, and we'll consider this, we'll consider the preliminary resolution at the next meeting of the IDA. That puts you off another month or 2 weeks or however, you know, whenever it is that we're going to meet again. But I'm comfortable assuming that you want to move forward today, and I'm sure Don would like you to move forward today. That I can tailor the Schedule A to the resolution to what has been, quote, agreed upon at this, during this meeting.
I mean, I certainly think we're ready as well.
I don't want to throw too many wrenches into this thing, but back to Joe Scott's point early on about setting a hard number. Should this be considered the 2021 number, and then should there be some sort of escalation to this base number that we're looking at, whether that be the 3% or some sort of CPI adjustment that we want to tie it to? That's one thought. And then the second thought was, I don't know if anybody else had any further thoughts on my point about the years 11 through 20.
Well, I'll respond mechanically. I'm fine with your first point, and I can add that. The second point, and I'll throw it back to Don. One of the big issues, the reason why pilots for solar projects, and frankly, pilots for energy generating projects are generally tied to megawatt production, is that the developer owner doesn't want to be subject to the vagaries of the assessed value process. So having years 1 through 10 be based on a formula of $20,000 per megawatt, and then the last 10 years or 9 years, I didn't quite, in terms of your formula, having it tied to assessed value will defeat, in my view, and I'll pass it to Don, one of the major impacts or one of the major goals of these pilot structures for solar projects is that they want certainty, if you will, of what the pilot payment's going to be.
Okay, so you're asking for comment from me, Joe, Don?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, here's how I look at that. I think first, I think it should be a minimum of 20,000. I'm not a fan. I want to talk about the escalator a minute. I don't know if 3% is, I'm not trying to talk the county out of money in that regard, but I don't know, maybe I think 1 or 2% as an escalator would be okay. And then, yes, I think the follow-on years are handled like any other pilot. I think that's how it should work. Because here's why. It's a reason why. We do know that most solar, I shouldn't say most, but they will probably go after, jumbo depreciation numbers. I mean, you've probably heard that before, Joe. They'll probably go after that. So they're going to.
I'm sorry, Don. Could I interrupt you for a second?
Sure. Yeah.
I had a hard stop at 3:30. I rescheduled my 3:30 to 4.
Okay.
If the sense of the board is that they would like the provision to be in the last 10 years tied to assessed value and a percentage on assessed value, I can document that. I will tell you without any doubt that is not market with respect to solar projects. I'm happy to draft that, and it's certainly something that I can prepare, not a problem. But so just to kind of move things along so that we have some resolution here, literally and figuratively.
Well, how about this? You're right. Me too. I mean, I've been here since 7 a.m. this morning. So yeah, what if we don't move? How about if the board's consensus is we move along that way? Look, we have the public hearing, we have the comment period. Let's hear what comes back. Let's test those waters.
Sure. And so, do you want me to add the language regarding assessed value for the last 10 years?
I mean, that's a question to the board. So I'll.
Right. Yeah, it is a question to the board.
Why would we want to deviate from our standard pilot? Yes, question I have.
Well, maybe some at this time we can work it. We can
Well,
leave
that's
it out.
really a question to you, Ben. Do you want me to add that? I'll add it if you want to push that, that's fine. And if the other board members want it, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I'm more inclined to ask for the 5% per year step ups until we get to full taxation in the last 10 years. That's more in line with a traditional pilot. And I think that's in line with our standard 10-year pilot is that step up, right? So, and I think the part of the reason for having a pilot is to allow for some cash flow return to the developer in order to establish a point where they're able to repay the tax at full assessment. So traditionally, when you see a pilot, it usually ends somewhere between 80 and 100% in the last year of the full assessed value.
Well, but let's just think about this for a second. So in year 11, they'd be paying 5% of assessed value, or they'd be paying
50, what would it be, 50% in 11?
50%. I got it. Okay, right. Okay,
Right,
50%.
whatever, however we back into 100 in year.
Yeah, got it. Okay, I'm with you. Okay, and then it would jump 5% a year over the last. Okay, all right, I got it.
I think my math in my head is like the 20,000 is somewhere around 40% of the full taxation. So that's like a 40% or 60% reduction over 10 years, and then a 50% reduction after that.
Okay.
I think that's close math. I can comment on that. I think that's close math.
Okay.
Yeah, round numbers.
Are we ready to call the question on this?
Yes.
So if I understand correctly, we are voting on a fixed number of $20,000 per megawatt, a minimum of 20 years. The what is it, 1 or 2% that we're talking about?
I'm going to use 3%. 3% as an escalator.
3% as an escalator until year 11? Is that what we're talking about?
Yep.
Then to go to 5%?
Yes. 50% and then 5% thereafter. 50% of assessed value and then 5%, a 5% jump each year.
Okay.
Could I just interject one other thing, guys?
Understand?
Yes, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. One more thing, and I'm sorry to interrupt again, but it's important, I think, you put minimum of 20. The reason why is the supervisors have indicated they want the flexibility to negotiate for more. I throw that out there for board consideration. I mean, it can actually end up being 20, but the minimum is they're fixed on that language pretty hard because there's some supervisors that think they can get more.
I'm okay. I thought we were discussing that, but I'm okay with that. Is anybody else?
I think that's fine. Minimum of 20,000 per meg and a term not to exceed 20 years. And the escalator as you've described it.
Okay. Can I have a motion to that effect?
Yeah, yes, and we also, the last part of it is the allocation among the taxing jurisdictions.
Correct.
Okay,
That's going to go out to each of the jurisdictions to decide whether they want pro rata or 1/3, 1/3, 1/3.
correct. All right, so I'll make that motion.
I'll
Is there a
second.
second?
Sure, I'll second.
Now, we need to do a roll call vote on this. Is this correct, Joe, Scott?
That would be my preference, Chair. Yes.
Okay. I'll go first. I vote yes. Joe Capani,
No,
Wanda King,
Yes.
Peter,
Yes.
Ben,
Yes.
resolution is passed. So at this point now, if I understood you correctly, Joe, is that you're going to take this data, modify option B to incorporate all that, and then it will be sent out for public comment.
Yes, Chair, and I want all of your home numbers so I can call you at 9 o'clock or later to double check on the language.
Saturday
And I
night.
want Don's phone number because I'm going to call him at 5 in the morning. That's when I do my best work.
Hey, you might as well. Everybody else does.
All right. Is there any other discussion on pilot policy for solar?
No, but it
Hearing
was a
none.
very,
Go ahead.
very good discussion.
And I want to thank the board for accommodating me at 2 o'clock today. I'm really sorry I had to ask for that, but thank you all.
Thank you for your comments, Don.
Okay. Yes, thank you, Don.
Thank you.
Let's move on. So is there any other business that come before the IDA board?
No, there's not, Jet, at least on my behalf.
I'll
next
entertain a
meeting.
motion for adjournment. Oh,
what about the
okay.
next meeting? You want to set a next meeting date?
That's a good idea, Joe.
It should be after the public comments, right?
Probably.
Well, I'll just say this, it's going to take us more than 30 days to get all this together. I mean, give me 4 or 5 days to get the policy redone. I mean, in the meantime, Ron can be putting together a mailing list. But no, you're right. We could hold a public hearing. We don't need to hold a public hearing on 30 days notice. So sure, yeah, okay. Yeah, whatever, whatever the sense of the board is. Ron and I will work out a schedule.
Probably still have to be at least near the end of March, if not first week in April.
Beginning of April, I would think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, to allow time for publications and stuff, yes. Yep.
Thank God.
So how about April 2nd?
I would say mid-April.
That's a Tuesday.
I think you better
Mid-April?
go. Yeah, I think you better go out another week or so.
Week of the 15th?
The week of the 12th, you mean, right, Chet? Or the 11th?
I'm open to any time here. What works?
13th or 14th or
13th is a Tuesday.
Tuesday's not the best day for me, in the morning anyway.
Okay.
oh, we could put in maybe Wednesday. We'll just go down the week.
The 14th?
Yeah. That's good.
14th will work
Great.
for me.
And we'll
14th,
do,
14th, okay?
yeah, we'll go back to our normal time, 9 a.m.
Well, 9:30, wasn't it?
Either way.
I'm good with that.
9:30?
Okay.
9:30? Okay. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second,
Second.
Second it.
meeting adjourned.
All right.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Now, remember,
guys.
my
Now-
board members stayed because of the other company.
Now we have another meeting here.
Oh,
Oh, yeah.
okay.
Yes.
We
Now,
have CDC.
we want to handle that now or next time?
Joe, I think we can, if we just spend 10 minutes, we can get rid of the CRC. Joe, you don't have to stay if you don't want to, but
I'm all set. Yeah, I'm late for my second meeting. Okay.
I know. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, no,
Yes, Joe,
all
thank
good.
you very
All
much.
good. Good discussion. Thanks, Don.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. I'm going home.
All right, thanks, Don.
Okay.
Bye,
Thank you.
Don.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. Call to order a meeting of the Capital Resource Corporation. We have the minutes from March 10th, 2020. Have a
Wow.
motion to adopt.
So moved.
Second,
I can
Second.
second that.
minutes approved. Treasurer, review and approval of trial balance. Ron, you want to talk about this a second?
Yes, I'm missing my paper, but the company just has that cash what it is. It's parked locally. It keeps us afloat. What it does is pay obviously for our audit and our legal advertisements and our insurance for the year, which amounts to about $4,000. It's not stayed the same. It started there and it took those expenses out. We haven't had any income the last year because there's been no projects. We really haven't had nonprofits supply to us. Of course, it's difficult enough in regular times, let alone COVID times. But it's there and it's covering our costs for the year. So hopefully we move forward and get a project.
Okay. Any further question on the trial and balance? Committees of the corporation,
Not at this time, Chet. There's nothing to report.
new business?
Well, there's no new business, but I'll throw in old business just as a comment. The college dormitory project, for your information, Ben, and even Peter, since you're relatively new, we did a dormitory bond for SUNY Cobleskill 5-6 years ago. $10 million, put our name on it and did the transaction. And so that's our one big project over this time period. And so apparently they're still doing well. At least they were as of last June 30th, which was our fiscal year end. And so at this point in time, hopefully they're still doing well. I've heard nothing otherwise. So that's pretty much the status.
Okay.
Election of officers?
Yeah, obviously just to nominate, basically essentially the same as the IDA. And I'll act as nominating committee at this point. Chester Burton is chair and Joe Trapani is vice chair and Wanda King is treasurer, with Sarah filling in as the secretary. If nobody's opposed, I'd like to say that's the same slate stays of those officers. I think we probably need a motion from somebody to.
Yep.
It's not running. I'll make the nomination then.
That only leaves you and Ben, Peter.
I suspect I'll have to second that, yeah.
The other three aren't jumping up and down or forwards.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carried. Other?
I have no other at this point in time. Is just, I hope if if you hear nonprofits, I mean, the biggest, the most common one would either be the, SUNY or the hospital. The size, they have projects the size that, a bond would be appropriate. So if anybody hears of, maybe an ongoing project or a project they're thinking about, certainly let me know or let them know to contact, us. We can go from there.
Very good.
It sort of fills a niche.
Do we need to set a date for the next?
I'll probably, this company, obviously being not as active as the general IDA one, we probably have one closer to the spring or in the spring. We do have to have a governance committee meeting, just for the policies that are being worked on for the IDA, which aren't ready yet. They're waiting for this big policy to get done before the whole collaboration of them comes together. Well, and then the audit committee.
So we basically get.
I mean, we would tag along with
Basically
the
tack
IDA.
that on to the IDA? Okay.
Yes. I mean, unless there's some desire to split it apart because it's easier, but usually we just try to tack it on so we don't have to get together again.
Have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second.
Meeting adjourned.
All right. Thank you all.
All right, guys.
Thanks for the
Thank you,
merit.
everybody.
Only the
Stay safe.
temperature one.
Marathon meeting.
Good to see everybody.
16,
Chat.
69.
Oh,
Okay.
I
Probably
need-
less by now on.